It's hard when you grow up with a person that you may never have met or knew personally, but you knew they were there, doing what you loved about them, knowing that their art was right beside you in your own life. The death of Chester seems like yesterday and still hurts like yesterday. Chester knew his lack of luster for life was always chasing him, and sadly, it caught up to him. This is the moment we lost a 1 in a million person, Chester. It's easy to look at Chester's situation and be devastated for him. You see and hear a person that really deals with depression, but knows they have an amazing life with family and friends and are luckier than any other person they know. Chester's life was full of situations dealing with addictions and sobriety, but one big element that stuck to him like glue was depression, but the most dangerous kind, the kind of depression where you just want to disappear. As cliche and sad as it sounds, most of the time, when we look at artists that are trying to have normal lives that are not normal, the ones that talk about suicide and depression usually end up hurting themselves. It's a battle that seems to find the most loved artists. As Chester finds himself closer to his last year with us in 2017, it seems that more and more interviews that he takes, he talks of depression and the imbalance in his own head, what he's trying to understand with himself, why he feels this way, almost asking the public for help, it would seem. Almost 2 months, exactly to the day before Chester's last day with us, one of his dearest best friends, who he looks to and has built much trust with, would harm himself. Cornell will take his life in May of 2017. Late one night, after playing a full show in a theater for the last time, completely shocking the world, Chester was said to be devastated. Not only that he's lost a best friend, but that this thing that's plagued his mind for so long has just found its way into his friend's life and seems so close to Chester. It had to be not only painful, but scary to know the same thoughts were chasing him. Cornell has a funeral where many friends and family, where artists and musicians show up. Chester is in the background with most pictures. He speaks and sings at his friend's funeral, nobody realizing that most of these people here will be gathering again in less than 2 months for Chester's funeral. After that day, Chester walks back into his life. Linkin Park will have their last show on June 6 in England. The show goes as planned. Normal, with no whispers of problems from turmoil in the band or Chester showing signs of problems with himself. Just a normal night, but the last night, Chester would be with his Linkin Park bandmates. From this point, Chester takes his family and goes on vacation. They end up in Arizona, spending time together before Chester embarks on his next big tour. Chester's family obviously has no clue that they're spending the last hours with him. Chester's wife would even grab video of Chester laughing, playing, in what seemed to be a very happy moment with his family. And it may have been just that, although somewhere inside Chester, he was dealing with other elements. The family has their last meal together, their last hugs, and their last goodbyes. Chester simply says he has to go and leaves his family, never to see them again. Chester says he needs to go home. He needs to get back to work, leaving the vacation early and leaving everyone alone. The last days of Chester's life, many of his friends had started receiving emails and text messages from Chester. Some are just simply a friendly hello, and some are Chester looking for a conversation about life from a friend. In one of the messages, Chester talks of being sober from his last 3-day relapse, where it said that Chester had a blackout from alcohol. Many will say, looking back, of all the reaching out from Chester in the last week, The evidence seemed to be overwhelming that Chester was extremely struggling, but not wanting to show off his cards. Now that Chester is home, his family is away, and he's alone in his home with his own thoughts. When Chester left his wife and his children from the vacation, she swore that nothing seemed odd. She knew that Lincoln Park had been doing promos, rehearsing, and getting ready for a huge tour they were about to go on in 2 weeks. But all the while, Chester was seeming excited and happy. No signs of anything else. Chester's wife said she wasn't picking up on anything. No little signs. Nothing that she had seen before. But obviously, Chester was going through something in his own mind. With Chester never showing his hand with what he was hiding, made the situation even scarier after what would happen. Chester's wife said, in the past, he had showed signs from his depression, falling back into self-medication from alcohol, or even going so far, a few times, from threatening suicide or attempting it. When Chester arrives home, alone and away from his family, it's not entirely clear the chain of events that took place, but it does seem that Chester had premeditated what was going to happen. Chester would end up in his bedroom alone with a bottle of alcohol and sitting by himself. While Chester is sitting down in his bedroom next to a table, drinking, upset and alone, he's biting his nails, leaving them on the table, and eventually, when he gets up, he sets his phone on top of some of his nail bitings. Chester's wife later says that he had a habit of doing this when he was dealing with strong anxiety, trying to soothe himself. Chester, with no note, no goodbyes, no wishes, no whys, grabs a leather belt and uses it to end his life, right there in his bedroom, still with the boarding pass in his pocket from the plane he had just got off of. And Chester, who had just turned 41, was now gone. When Chester is found hanging in his bedroom from taking his own life, the devastation and shock would sweep through the news. Chester's wife and their children were still away in Arizona on vacation, having to immediately fly back home with the terrible news. Chester is taken out of the house, and it's ruled that he took his own life. The autopsy report showed alcohol in the bloodstream, but no drugs that could have altered Chester's mind. It's still not known, but the day that Chester took his own life was the same day as Chris Cornell's birthday, July 20th. Some think that Chester did this on purpose, and many think it was just a coincidence. Chester left no note saying his goodbyes to his family, which makes it look like Chester hadn't premeditated what he was going to do, flying back home. Chester really did have an appointment that morning of the 20th, but maybe, just maybe, while Chester was at home alone, his mind turned on him. It's not fair to say that it's selfish of Chester to do this to his family. What many saw as Chester's positives in his lone life, maybe it became his worries that added to his depression. Chester said many times that this has been a long life struggle and not something that just started to show itself. Depression shows no mercy to anybody, and Chester was no exception. People that harm themselves are obviously going through a battle in their own mind, and it's a terrible element that a person has to go through. Chester's wife said that the pain of losing Chester was unbearable pain. For the first few weeks, she laid on the floor crying, not able to control her emotions. And still, she says that when she's in a restaurant or a public place, that she has to run out if she hears the sound of a Linkin Park song start to play. It's important to know that Chester loved his family and his life, his 6 children that he adored. What Chester was dealing with, it had to be so miserable and lonely. With the interviews that Chester gives, it's almost like he knew that he would eventually cross this road, that one day he was going to lose to depression, and he was trying to soften the blow as much as he could to anyone that would listen. But Chester leaves art that is untouchable and will be talked about till the end of time. Long live the memory of Chester, forever 41.